Campaign chair Paul Manafort. Turns out the special counsel is torpedoing Manafort's plea deal. Robert Mueller is alleging that Manafort has lied repeatedly to federal investigators. Find out why even liberals tonight are calling this a bombshell that could be good news for the president. We'll have details straight ahead. Hello and welcome to Fox News Tonight. I'm Ed Henry in for Shannon Bream. We begin tonight with the escalating chaos at the border. The president tonight fighting back against allegations that he and the U.S. Border Patrol are responsible for mistreating women and children at the border after migrants attempted to rush the San Ysidro crossing in Southern California. Turns out Border Patrol agents are now saying migrants have been throwing rocks and bottles at them and that some of the migrants have been pushing women and children to the front, perhaps hoping the U.S. government will overreact and hurt them. Our correspondent Trace Gallagher is tracking the latest for us tonight live. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Ed. No one disputes that a large group of migrants tried to rush the border and get through the fencing that separates Mexico from the U.S. Mexico's interior minister said 500 migrants tried to cross the border violently. The Department of Homeland Security put the number at more than 1,000, many of them throwing rocks and bottles at both Mexican authorities and U.S. Border Patrol agents. U.S. agents then responded by using tear gas to push the migrants back, a tactic many Democrats condemned. Hillary Clinton said it was wrong. California Governor-elect Gavin Newsom called it counter to American ideals. And Hawaii Democratic Senator Brian Schatz accused the Border Patrol of using chemical weapons before walking his statement back. The chief of the Border Patrol defended the use of tear gas and the actions of her agents. Watch.
Our agents were being assaulted. A large group rushed the area and they were throwing rocks and bottles at my men and women, putting them in harm's way as well as other members of the caravan. We needed to disperse the group, and with that assaultive nature, it was imperative that we disperse them from the area.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen also says the caravan is far larger and more organized than previous caravans. She even accused the migrants of using women and children as, quote, human shields, saying women and kids were pushed to the front of the line. And in a rare criticism of the migrants, Mexico's National Human Rights Commission saying it, quote, reiterates that members of the caravans that cross our country should respect Mexican laws and not engage in actions that affect the communities they pass through. And amid the chaos, both the vehicle and pedestrian crossings at the San Ysidro border crossing, the nation's busiest, were shut down for several hours, no doubt having a major economic impact on both the U.S. and Mexico. Tonight, the president was asked what it would take for him to close the border again. Watch.
Violence, if they do a charge, because with a closed border, it's very easy to stop. With an open border, it's not. If they do a charge, as you know, we have a big caravan coming up, another one.
An estimated 5,000 to 7,000 migrants are still in Tijuana waiting for their asylum applications. The Tijuana mayor says his city cannot handle it. Ed.
Thank you, Trace. Amid all of that trouble at the border, the president calling on Congress to fund his border wall during their lame duck session. Will that confrontation lead to a partial government shutdown? Here's senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram with the story by the numbers.
Ed, the flashpoint is President Trump's border wall in the Department of Homeland Security spending bill. Republicans lose control of the House in January. A December standoff over the wall is why Republicans view this as the last chance to secure wall funding. Offstage, there are conversations about potential attachments to a spending bill, provisions to protect special counsel Robert Mueller from firing, emergency aid to help California and the Carolinas recover after devastating wildfires and hurricanes. The president is pushing for $5 billion for the wall, but Mr. Trump long ago promised $26 billion in wall funding. Such a plan would pay for the wall on a multi-year basis, but the only things for which Congress budgets down the road are federal heating assistance, the Farm Bill, and highway programs. The House defeated legislation twice this year, which provided wall money, but also offered a path to citizenship for some DACA recipients. The message, blocking what some conservatives regard as amnesty, is more important than a border wall. It's possible lawmakers could enact temporary legislation for a week or two to avoid an immediate shutdown, or Republicans could push for a stopgap measure that stretches into January. It's doubtful some Democrats would agree to that plan. That scenario would hamstring House Democrats right away as soon as they assume the majority next year. There's a lot of pressure on the president to make good on his campaign promise of a border wall and attempt a shutdown. Or is President Trump willing to take half a loaf and say he secured, quote, down payments on the wall? That tees up a fight with House Democrats next year. After all, this is the president's signature issue. Fighting with Democrats over the wall as he nears the 2020 presidential campaign could be good politics for the president, Ed.
All right, Chad. Honduras is the source of many of the migrants in that caravan, and now tonight, one of the Honduran president's brothers is being charged by U.S. federal prosecutors of being, quote, a large-scale drug trafficker. Antonio Hernandez allegedly scheming to bring tons of cocaine into America. Hernandez has previously denied any involvement in the drug traffic. And breaking tonight, special counsel Robert Mueller claims the former Trump campaign chair, Paul Manafort, has violated his plea deal by allegedly lying to the FBI on multiple subject matters. Manafort claims he's been truthful, but Mueller's office argues in a filing that the government will also file a detailed sentencing submission to the probation department and the court in advance of sentencing that sets forth the nature of the defendant's crimes and lies, including those after signing the plea agreement herein. Manafort was convicted on 8 counts related to bank and tax fraud in Virginia earlier this year. In one explanation of tonight's development, ABC News is reporting that special counsel prosecutors were, quote, not getting what they want. That, according to one source with knowledge of the discussions. So from Manafort to the border wall, much to discuss with tonight's Power Panel. Let's bring in tonight's folks, Democratic strategist Zach Friend, former State Department press officer Morgan Ortagus, and Fox News contributor, opinion editor at the Washington Times, Charlie Hurt. Good evening, all.
Good evening, Ed.
Good evening.
Hi, Ed.
Zach, I want to start with you. In Manafort, there is one sentence that does not appear in any of this court filing. Nowhere does it say Paul Manafort turned on President Trump.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I worked at a law enforcement agency for almost a decade, and I'll tell you that the one thing that always seems to come back and bite people is when they're not truthful. The one thing that law enforcement and prosecutors hate more than anything is when people don't come clean on things. And I think what you're seeing here is actually exactly that, is the Mueller group basically saying, look, you're not being truthful with us. We're going to make sure that we can come after you with all we got. But
Charlie Hurt, you know, as a Trump supporter, we've been hearing about collusion and obstruction of justice for months and months and months. Nothing has really been produced on either. And now Paul Manafort, the man that many on the left was hoping at some point would turn on the president, turns out he, according to Mueller anyway, has been lying left and right. So even if he did have something he wanted to say about the president, does he have any credibility left?
That's a great point. You know, and if you go back to the original charges and what Manafort was convicted on, of course, none of that had to do with the aforementioned purpose of Mueller's investigation in the first place, which was Russia collusion. I think that that's an important point. But I think the even more important point is what we have now, and that is that you know, obviously Mueller is not going to drop Manafort as a witness if he's producing, and that raises two important questions. One is whether he's producing anything, and the second thing is whether he even has anything to produce. Right. And either one of those would seems to be probably good news for Donald Trump.
Now, Morgan, I mentioned that the Manafort legal team is insisting he did not lie, so all of this will come out one way or another. We'll find out. But if he did lie, and is going to face even more criminal charges on top of what he was already found guilty in Virginia, there are some people on all sides of this debate, left and right, saying on social media tonight, this may be more than anything about Paul Manafort trying to get a pardon from the president down the road because he's facing a mountain of crimes.
I think that sounds a little fanciful. I don't think that he's basing his entire testimony over trying to get a pardon from the president, especially considering that there are still state crimes to be tried for, which the president wouldn't have pardon authority for anyway. I think what we're going to see, what you said in your earlier report, is that if Mueller and his team are going to allege that Manafort has been lying, they're going to have to actually prove this, and they're going to have to do that in that court filing that you referenced. I expect a mountain of evidence to be in there. There will will have to be a mountain of evidence if they're going to show that he was lying, what he was lying about.
Yeah.
I spoke to some FBI sources, friends of mine who are retired, who have been involved in these sorts of investigations earlier today, and they made the point that they thought that this pointed to really potentially a bad investigation, a bad case before they made the deal with Manafort. They thought it was, listen, it's very weird to have a testimony like this, a witness like this, who then you turn around and have to press charges against him. So they think it's quite suspicious that maybe there wasn't the case of Russian collusion that perhaps they thought they would get out of Mueller once he started to testify.
All right, let's shift gears to immigration. The president had a big rally in Mississippi. We've got a big Senate battle that we're going to talk about later in the show. In Mississippi, that's going to determine the balance of power, the last Senate seat to be decided. The president rallying for the Republican Senate candidate, and here's what he said about the wall.
You're right, and we had a lot of it built and it's going up, but I'll tell you that the rest of it, so that's pretty nasty looking wire, isn't it? Huh?
Okay. All right. Apparently that soundbite is not there. But the bottom line is the president was talking about the wall and was saying, that the migrant crisis, Zach, shows him that this finally has to be built. And my question to you is, if a lot of these migrants are simply seeking asylum, why are they assaulting U.S. law enforcement?
I mean, I think that's a fair question, but I think that actually from a broader standpoint, Ed, I mean, one of the things that I think about here is that what actually drove people, mothers, to walk 2,000 miles with infants and toddlers to do this. Obviously, the situation in their home country is untenable. It's very telling about the situation in their home country.
Okay, pardon me. I'm going to let you say that, and we can go on about that. But you're not answering my question, which is, if they have such a horrible situation in their country, and they want to be in America, and they love America, allegedly, why are they attacking U.S. law enforcement? Why are they not coming peacefully? Why are they assaulting U.S. law enforcement? Please answer that.
Well, as I said, I think that's a fair point, and I think, as the Border Patrol has also noted, this is actually a very small group of people within the overall caravan that are seeking asylum that have become agitated over what I would assume would be the delay in amount of time to actually be able to seek asylum within the United States. There's never an acceptable situation by which you would attack either a U.S. military, U.S. law enforcement, or any kind of U.S. entity in general. So I'm in total agreement with you on that.
Okay.
But I think that the broader issue, though, Ed, is just it's telling on both sides. I mean, it's telling on what kind of country they're trying to come into if we're tear gassing people, and it's telling of what kind of country they're leaving if they're willing to. I mean, what parent? I mean, I'm a parent. What parent wouldn't want? I mean, I would do the exact same thing. I wouldn't attack U.S. law enforcement, but I would definitely walk for 2,000 miles just on a hope situation to make my kid's life better.
Okay, but there's another way to look at that in terms of a parent, Charlie, and it is, what parent would put their children in the middle of what is a violent situation?
Sure. And, of course, if they want to seek asylum, they should seek asylum in the first country they come to, and that should have happened long before they reached the border. The U.S. border should have happened in Mexico or wherever. But the other thing is, look, the bottom line is we have laws, we have a border, and we have the right, we have the requirement to protect that border. And you've had both parties have had control of Congress in the past 10, 15 years, that if they wanted to change these laws, they could have changed these laws. They didn't change these laws. We have people on the border enforcing these laws that are on the books. And to sit back and armchair criticize the law enforcement agents for enforcing the laws that have been duly put on the books, I think is reckless and dangerous.
Morgan, I've got 20 seconds. What about the idea that Chad talked about with the funding? Is there a chance for a partial government shutdown because the president wants the wall funding?
I think that there's a big chance for it, Ed. At this point, I sort of expect it to happen if Congress doesn't make a deal before this December 7th shutdown. It wouldn't be an entire government shutdown. It would be a partial government shutdown as it relates to Homeland Security funding. I think this is the president's last best chance to get the border wall funding, because he's going to have a hard time getting it with Nancy Pelosi in charge.
Yeah, no doubt. A new power dynamic coming in January for sure. Zach, Morgan, Charlie, appreciate all your insights.
Thanks, guys.
My pleasure.
All right, we've got a Fox News alert. We are now just hours away from the polls opening in Mississippi for a special Senate election. We just mentioned the president pulling out all the stops tonight to rally support for Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. She's been under fire. Correspondent Peter Ducey live from Gulfport, Mississippi. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Ed. This was the last big Trump campaign-style rally of 2018. It's the last one of the cycle, last one of the year. And despite the controversy surrounding Cindy Hyde-Smith, White House officials that I've spoken to say there was never any hesitation about sending the president down here for 2 rallies today to try to help her, to stump for her and help her hold the Senate seat that she was appointed to a few months ago. She has been under siege, and that's because past comments that she made joking about public lynchings or about discouraging young liberals to vote have started circulating recently, and she did not address either controversy tonight.
It is about standing firm on the Second Amendment rights all day long. I think that I have given you one reason why I can ask for your vote tonight. That's because I have worked very hard for you, and you can count on me when it comes to your conservative values.
At one point today, the Democratic candidate Mike Espy said that he's heard Hyde-Smith is referred to as the hanging senator in D.C. He has been focusing a lot on those controversial comments, especially the one about public hangings. And Espy is the underdog in this race, but he's also the only opponent anywhere to ever endure 2 Trump rallies in the same day in the same state. The president tried tonight to lump him in with Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Maxine Waters, and he got some of his loudest applause lines when talking about immigration and trade.
Tomorrow's election is about safety, and tomorrow's election is about prosperity. For decades, Washington politicians allowed foreign countries to plunder our jobs, shutter our factories, and decimate our industries. I've been talking about it for 20 years.
And tonight was the rare Trump rally where the president might not have been the most famous person on the stage, because at one point during the pre-program, Santa was there, and he had a whole bunch of Make America Great Again hats that he was chucking out into the crowd.
Peter Doocy, you've been nice to this show all year long. Santa is going to be very kind to you. I'm confident of that. Thank you, Peter. All right. The CEO of General Motors visiting the White House today after announcing a round of plant closures and job cuts in the heart of Trump country in Canada. We asked FBN's Christina Partsinevelis to find out what happened inside the White House. Christina?
As car sales continue to slump, General Motors says it's going to end production at 5 factories in North America. That means cutting 15% of its workforce. 2 car factories on the chopping board: Ohio, where the Chevy Cruze is made, and Detroit, where the Chevy Volt, Buick LaCrosse, and the Cadillac CT6 are built. The president told reporters on Monday he wasn't happy about GM's plans to trim costs.
We have a lot of pressure on them. You have senators, you have a lot of other people, a lot of pressure. They say the Chevy Cruze is not selling well. I say, well, then get a car that is selling well and put it back in.
Senator Rob Portman of Ohio suggested GM shift focus to save American jobs.
Congress and the administration can put pressure on them, and should, to produce these new electric vehicles here in the United States of America, and particularly in the plants they already have.
Some of the factors behind the cuts: consumer demand shifting to SUVs, production costs, trade, and a focus on electrified and self-driving cars. GM took to Twitter to say, quote, "That means making hard decisions now to stay ahead of changing market conditions." Some of the affected plants could resume production, but that depends on contract negotiations with the United Auto Workers Union next year. Investors welcome the news of lower costs, sending the company's shares higher. The 5 GM plants will halt production next year. Back to you, Ed.
All right, Christina, thanks for that report. We've got new numbers from the Department of Homeland Security on the use of tear gas at the border. They say that during the Obama administration, it turns out they used tear gas a lot of times, and a lot of folks have not told you about it. We have the facts. We'll tell you all about it. Meanwhile, Trump officials are slamming Russia tonight. First, it was U.S. Ambassador to the UN. Now it's the Secretary of State issuing harsh words for Moscow in the wake of a dangerous escalation with Ukraine. The president himself weighing in earlier.
We've let
criticizing Russia for seizing Ukrainian ships and sailors on the Black Sea. Our correspondent Trey Yanks is here with where things stand tonight.
Martial law will be imposed in Ukraine after Russia captured 23 sailors in a fierce firefight off the coast of Crimea. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's request passed parliament this afternoon and goes into effect on Friday for 30 days. Troops have been put on military alert, and the two nations appear to be on the brink of war. Yesterday, a Russian Coast Guard vessel rammed into a Ukrainian tugboat, sparking one of the largest clashes between Russia and Ukraine since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. President Trump says the United States is working with European partners to ease tension.
We do not like what's happening either way. We don't like what's happening, and hopefully it'll get straightened out. I know Europe is not, they are not thrilled. They're working on it too. We're all working on it together.
Monday's vote for martial law will allow Ukraine to have increased defense capabilities, as Ukrainian cabinet members have suggested that Sunday's incident could be the first step towards fully blocking Ukrainian access to the Black Sea.
Russia has been conducting hybrid war against our country for the 5th year, but by attacking Ukrainian military boats, it moved on to a new stage of aggression.
The UN Security Council met today in an emergency session, where U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley released a formal warning towards Russia and called for the release of captured Ukrainian ships and crew while de-escalating the tension created. So far, Russia is blaming Ukraine for starting this incident, as the country's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov says that Russia is not concerned about the potential of international sanctions as punishment for firing on a Ukrainian vessel. Ed?
Thanks, Trey. Tonight, America's top diplomat is weighing in as well, calling it a dangerous escalation. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says the U.S. condemns this aggressive Russian action. Pompeo then calls for Russia to return the Ukrainian ships. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, also issuing a sharp rebuke.
What we witnessed this weekend is yet another reckless Russian escalation. It is an arrogant act that the international community must condemn and will never accept.
Let's turn to Fox News contributor, former CIA station chief in Moscow, in fact, Daniel Hoffman. Good evening, Daniel.
Good to see you.
I feel like we're right back in the same place. Crimea, which Russia annexed several years ago, which caused a lot of these tensions, and the bizarre situation where now Russia is trying to blame Ukraine.
I mean, only the KGB operative in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, could fire upon and seize Ukrainian vessels and then blame Ukraine for starting this incident, which is escalating tension and risking war.
The Wall Street Journal, when you mentioned Vladimir Putin, their editorial page tonight has an interesting line about all of this. Among other things, to say Vladimir Putin's method is to probe for weakness in adversaries and then see if there's any pushback to his aggression. I want to talk about that a little bit. First of all, what is the Ukraine going to do in terms of pushing back?
I think the question is what we're going to do to support Ukraine. And this administration has stepped out already with some strong statements and provided Javelin anti-tank missiles. I think we need to do more. We probably need to enhance our military and our intelligence collaboration with Ukraine and make it clear we stand for their territorial integrity. But Ukraine is under siege right now. They're fighting in Donbass against separatists whom Russia is supporting. Russia's mounting a full-force cyber attacks against Ukraine, against their media and electrical grid, running influence operations.
And it's important to underline what you just said about those missiles. The Ukrainians wanted those and were urging then-President Obama to send them, and he repeatedly refused to do it. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, others were urging the Obama administration to do it. They didn't do it. This president, President Trump, has stepped up before this crisis, months ago, to start providing that aid, even though it's something that Vladimir Putin doesn't like. It doesn't fit the narrative out there that the president is just all about Putin.
Absolutely. And defending Ukraine's territorial integrity is so important for us. Here's a country which is very interested in joining NATO and the European Union. And there's nothing that scares Vladimir Putin more than a country on his border with a sizable Russian population, Russian-speaking population, committed to democracy. You know, Vladimir Putin said the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. I mean, this is why, because at his doorstep is a country committed to the rule of law and democracy, and that threatens his regime security.
Vladimir Putin, last question, is also testing President Trump, it seems. And there was head scratching after the president seemed to suggest both sides had some blame here when he used that phrase, either way, that was played in that soundbite a moment ago. The president of the United States has a decision later this week. He's going to the G20 summit in South America and is expected to meet with Vladimir Putin. And there's some urging him, Don't sit down with him. This may be a repeat of Helsinki. What would your advice to the president be?
Oh, I would advise the president absolutely to sit down with Vladimir Putin and even make a public statement in front of Vladimir Putin that we won't stand.
So don't cancel a meeting. Go forward with a meeting, but take a tough line.
Take a tough line and make it clear to Putin that we won't stand for his attacks on Ukraine's sovereignty, and make it clear that we stand behind Ukraine and will do all that we can to support them. I think that's important for us.
Daniel Hoffman, some tough decisions ahead for this administration. Appreciate your insight. Okay. Breaking tonight as well, the chair of the California Democratic Party is taking a leave. This comes after multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. A live report coming up. Plus, Paris is burning, literally. Violent protests over the rising cost of fuel. And back at home, increasing concerns over climate change that the president is simply not buying. That's coming up.
I don't believe it. No, I don't believe it. It addresses our country. Right now, we're at the cleanest we've ever been.
The chair of the California Democratic Party is facing an internal probe tonight after multiple sexual misconduct allegations were lodged against him. Our correspondent Garrett Tenney has some breaking news on the matter. Good evening, Garrett.
Ed, good evening. Good to be with you. These allegations carry a lot of weight because they are coming from the third-ranking Democrat in the state party. Tonight, the chairman of the California Democratic Party is stepping aside during an investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct against party staffers. In a letter to party officials, Vice Chairman Daraca Larimore Hall called for Eric Bauman to be removed after learning about multiple incidents in which he sexually harassed and in some cases sexually assaulted individuals during party functions. The letter didn't detail the allegations or name the alleged victims, but Larimore Hall wrote, "Their stories illustrate a clear and escalating pattern of Chairman Bauman's horrific and dehumanizing behavior." Larimore Hall said he wrote the letter after first filing a complaint with the party's HR and telling Bauman to resign, which he refused to do. Bauman himself hasn't denied the allegations, including in a statement he released Saturday, which said in part, "I take seriously any allegation brought forward by anyone who believes they have been caused pain. I look forward to putting these allegations behind us and moving forward as unified Democrats." Previously, Bauman, who is the first openly gay person to lead the party in California, has had plenty to say about sexual misconduct allegations. Last year, when it came out that a state assemblyman allegedly had previously groped a staffer, he said the lawmaker needs to think long and hard about resigning. And in February, amidst a string of sexual misconduct scandals in the state legislature, Bauman told the AP, "There have been some of these problems at prior Democratic Party events. It's not going to happen on my watch." Bauman was narrowly elected chairman in May of last year, and there are already a number of state lawmakers and local party leaders calling for him to resign and be replaced even before this investigation is complete. According to the state party's bylaws, once Bauman has received a copy of the allegations, he has 10 days to either resign or respond in writing, so the clock is ticking.
Yeah, pressure is building tonight. Garrett Tenney, appreciate that report. There are also increasing concerns tonight on Capitol Hill about the possible environmental and economic effects of climate change. This follows a 600-page government report released Friday evening with some dire predictions, essentially met with a shrug from the president today. Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, has the latest tonight.
Paris is burning. Deadly protests continue after the French government imposed a new carbon tax. France is planning to spend about $15.2 billion by 2022 to develop its transportation infrastructure. Back in the U.S., 13 federal agencies here in Washington rolled out a serious warning about the environmental and economic threat of climate change for the United States. President Trump isn't sold.
I don't believe it. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, addresses our country. Right now, we're at the cleanest we've ever been.
The 1,600-page report's findings include temperatures in the U.S. are 1.8 degrees higher than 100 years ago. Seas are 9 inches higher. Heat waves, hurricanes, and wildfires are more severe. Climate change could cut GDP by 10% by 2100 if there are no changes.
Reasonable people can differ about how much and how rapidly. But I think it's clear that it's changing, and it's clear that humans are a contributing factor.
You're going to see devastation to our crops. You're already seeing the hurricanes because of the ocean warming, and you're certainly seeing in vivid color those horrible wildfires out west.
As for those devastating wildfires, some California lawmakers say hotter, drier weather has been a key factor.
Climate change is a very real part of this problem, no doubt about it. But also,
It is the management. The forests have not been properly managed for the last 70 years.
Utah Senator Mike Lee says he hasn't seen an effective solution.
All the proposals I've seen so far that would address any of these issues would devastate the U.S. economy and have little or no benefit.
Critics are using this as an opportunity to go after President Trump for withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Climate Accord championed by his predecessor. The White House notes the development of this report began under President Obama and says the next one will provide more transparent and data-driven information. Ed?
Thank you, Mike. A lot of criticism pouring in tonight from Democrats and the media over the use of tear gas at the border. They say it's inhumane.